covered entirely in dark brown hair, matted with moisture. The face was almost human, but flatter, broader, eyes that reflected my light like an animal's. And the expression. It wasn't blank or neutral. It was intelligent, aware. This thing was studying me just as I'd been studying it. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it made that sound again, that vocalization, and two others emerged from the forest behind it, smaller, but still massive. A family? A group? I didn't know. They didn't approach any closer. They just stood there, three shapes at the edge of my camp, watching. Then the largest one turned and walked back into the forest. The other two followed. Within seconds, they disappeared into the darkness, moving silently despite their size. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent with my emergency beacon ready, prepared to call for immediate evacuation if they came back. But they didn't. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. In the morning, I found something outside my tent. An arrangement. Stones, branches, and bones, laid out in the same pattern I'd been finding throughout my research area. But this one was different. In the center, placed carefully, was one of my camera traps. The one I'd put at the cave entrance. It was broken, deliberately. Someone, something, had taken it apart, removed the memory card, and left it as a message. I don't want to be watched. I don't want to be studied. Leave. I understood. I packed up my camp as quickly as I could, left most of my equipment behind. I grabbed my data, my satellite phone, and my emergency supplies, and I hiked to the nearest point where a float plane could land. I called for pickup immediately, said I had a medical emergency. They came within 6 hours. I never told them what really happened. I said I'd gotten sick, needed to get out early. They brought me back to Juneau, and I filed my official report. Said the survey was incomplete due to weather conditions. Technical difficulties with equipment. Standard stuff. I never mentioned what I'd found. The footage on my cameras mysteriously corrupted when I tried to download it. All those clear videos of the creatures, gone. Only blurry, useless frames remained. The photographs I'd taken were similar. Nothing clear enough to prove anything. The research station asked if I'd return next year to complete the survey. I said no. I quit that job and took a position studying forests in Oregon. Temperate rainforests, like the Tongass, but much more populated, much less wild. I think about those creatures sometimes, about how they've lived in that forest for thousands of years, hidden, intelligent enough to stay away from humans. I think about the arrangements they make, the patterns. Were they religious, territorial, warnings? I'll never know. But I learned something important. We're not alone in the wild places. There are things out there that we've never cataloged, never studied, never proven exist. And some of them want to stay that way. They don't want to be discovered. They don't want to be studied. They just want to be left alone in the territories they've occupied since long before we arrived. The Tongass is their home, not ours. We're visitors in their realm, and if we're wise, we'll respect that and leave them in peace. Because those creatures, whatever they are, they're not animals. They're not mindless beasts. They're something else, something aware and intelligent and ancient. And they've survived this long by staying hidden, by making sure that anyone who sees them clearly either can't prove it or knows better than to try. I know better now. I saw them. I documented them. And then I walked away. Because some discoveries aren't meant to be shared. Some knowledge is too dangerous to reveal. And some creatures deserve to remain unknown, mysterious, safe in the deep forests where they've always lived. The Tongass still calls to me sometimes. I dream about those trees, that mist, the sound of rain on leaves. And I dream about 3 figures standing at the edge of a camp, watching me, deciding whether I was a threat. They let me leave. They let me live. And in return, I keep their secret. I don't talk about what I found. I don't share my research. I just remember, and I wonder, and I hope that they're still out there, still hidden, still safe from the world that would destroy them if it knew they existed. The monsters aren't always dangerous. Sometimes they're just trying to survive in a world that's getting smaller every year. And sometimes the best thing a scientist can do is close his notebook, pack his bags, and leave the mystery unsolved. Some things are meant to remain in the darkness of the deep forest, and I pray they always will. I started noticing the marks on the 8th day. Deep scratches on tree trunks, too high to be from bears, too regular to be from natural causes. They looked almost like something had clawed the bark, but the grooves were over an inch deep. Whatever made them was strong. I assumed it was bears marking territory. Alaskan brown bears can stand 11 feet tall and weigh 1,500 pounds. They can do serious damage to a tree. I made note of it in my log and continued my work. Then I found the arrangement. In a clearing about a mile from my camp, I found logs and branches arranged in a circular pattern, not fallen naturally, placed deliberately. In the center was a pile of stones, stacked carefully, with deer bones arranged around them. I've worked in forests all over the world. I've seen bear nests, beaver dams, all sorts of natural structures. This was different. This was constructed. This had intent behind it. I took photographs and samples, documented everything. I wondered if it might be from local hunters or native peoples performing some kind of ceremony. But this area was remote. No trails led here. No signs of human activity except this one structure. That night, I heard sounds outside my tent. Not animal sounds. These were mechanical almost, like gears grinding or rocks scraping together, but rhythmic, deliberate. They circled my camp for maybe an hour, stopping occasionally, then continuing. When I shone my flashlight toward the sounds, they'd stop. When I turned off the light, they'd start again. In the morning, I found tracks around my camp. Huge tracks, but not from any animal I recognized. They were almost human-shaped, but much larger. Each print was over 20 inches long, pressed deep into the wet ground. Whatever made them was bipedal and heavy. I should have called for an early pickup. Any rational person would have. But I'm a scientist. I wanted to document this. Unknown species are rare, and if this was something new, it would be the discovery of my career. I spent the next few days following the tracks, documenting everything. They led through the densest parts of the forest, where the canopy was so thick that even at noon it felt like twilight. The tracks went places where I needed both hands to climb, yet whatever made them seemed to move easily through terrain that challenged me. I found more arrangements. Bones, stones, branches, all placed in patterns I couldn't decipher, and more trees with those deep scratches. They formed trails, like markers, leading deeper into the forest toward the base of a mountain. On day 14, I found the cave. The tracks led right to it, a dark opening in a rocky hillside, maybe 8 feet high and 6 feet wide. Water dripped from the entrance, and the ground around it was worn smooth, like something heavy had passed through many times. I set up a camera trap at the entrance and marked the location on my GPS. Then I hiked back to camp. That night, I reviewed the footage from my other cameras. On 3 different cameras, spread across my research area, I'd captured the same thing. A figure, massive, covered in dark hair, walking upright through the forest. It appeared just for a few frames on each camera, moving past at the edge of the field of view. I slowed down the footage, enhanced it as much as I could. The figure was at least 9 feet tall, broad across the shoulders, arms that hung down past its knees. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, that's what I'd found. Part of me was elated, scientific proof of a cryptid. Part of me was terrified because I was alone in the forest with something that could tear me apart if it wanted to. I called the research station in Juneau on my satellite phone, told them what I'd found. They were skeptical but interested. They said they'd send someone to verify, but it would be at least a week. Weather was bad. Planes weren't flying. Could I hold out? I said yes. I had enough supplies. And I wanted more documentation. I needed multiple angles, clear footage, maybe even physical evidence, like hair samples or scat. That was a mistake. The night after I called it in, it came to my camp. I was in my tent when I heard breathing outside, deep, slow breaths. Then a sound I'll never forget. A vocalization, part howl and part something else. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, echoing through the forest. My tent shook. Something was pushing against it, testing its strength. I could see the shape of a hand through the fabric, massive fingers spread wide, pressing inward. I grabbed my satellite phone and flashlight, ready to run if the tent gave way. The hand withdrew. The breathing stopped. Silence. I waited for an hour, not moving, before I dared to look outside. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw it, standing at the edge of my camp, maybe 30 feet away, watching me. It was taller than I'd thought from the videos. 10 feet, maybe more. I told them what was happening, that something was trying to get into my apartment, that people were disappearing. They said they'd send someone, but weather was bad. It might be days. They told me to stay inside, stay safe. Then the phone went dead. Not disconnected, just silent, like something had cut the signal. I spent that night in my closet, surrounded by everything I could use as a weapon. Kitchen knives, a baseball bat, a can of bear spray. I could hear things moving in my apartment. Footsteps, objects being moved, breathing. When morning came, if you could call that twilight morning, everything in my apartment had been rearranged. Furniture moved. Pictures turned to face the wall. My front door was open, even though I'd locked it. And in my bathroom mirror, written in condensation that shouldn't have been there, were 2 words in Utqiaġvik. I used my phone to translate them. Leave now. I left. I threw everything I could carry into a bag and walked to the airport. There were others there, maybe 20 people, all trying to get on the next flight out. We waited in the terminal for 6 hours for a plane that could land in the darkness. No one talked. We just sat there, exhausted, traumatized, waiting to escape. The sun returned to Utqiaġvik on January 23rd. I wasn't there to see it. I'd left Alaska entirely by then, taken a job teaching in California, where the sun shines 300 days a year. I never went back, never even returned for my things. The official reports said nothing unusual happened in Utqiaġvik that winter. The people who disappeared were listed as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or accidents. Mary's death was ruled suicide by hypothermia. The mass exodus was attributed to economic factors. But I know what happened. I know what lives in that darkness. The Inupiaq elders were right. Tuanbach is real. It's always been there, waiting in the polar night, patient and eternal. Most years it just watches. But every so often, it reminds people that the Arctic belongs to it. We're just visitors, temporary and fragile. I don't do well with darkness anymore. I keep lights on all the time. I moved somewhere warm and bright. And I never, ever want to experience polar night again. Because I know now what waits there. What watches from the black. What walks between the buildings when the sun is gone. Some places aren't meant for humans. Some darkness is too deep to fight. And some things in this world don't care about science or logic or rational explanations. They just are, ancient and patient, waiting for the light to fail, so they can remind us that we're not the apex predators we think we are. The polar night will come to Utqiaġvik again this November. The sun will set, and it won't rise for 65 days. And I wonder how many people will make it through to January. How many will hear the scratching on their walls, see the figures standing in the street, feel the presence of something older than human civilization. I hope I never find out. I hope I never see that darkness again. Because once you've felt it, really felt it, you understand. The Arctic doesn't belong to us. It never did. We're just temporary guests in a realm that tolerates our presence most of the time. But when the sun is gone and the darkness is complete, the rules change. The ancient things come out, and they remind us, in the most terrible ways possible, that this is their world. We're just visiting, and we're very, very fragile. Tongass Rainforest Entity. I'm a forestry researcher. My job is to study old-growth forests, document biodiversity, track environmental changes. My name is Dr. Robert Chen. I'm 36 years old, and I spent 6 weeks last fall in Alaska's Tongass National Forest conducting a routine survey. What I found there wasn't routine at all. It was something that shouldn't exist. Something that's been in that rainforest longer than humans have been in North America. The Tongass is massive, nearly 17 million acres of temperate rainforest in southeast Alaska. It's one of the last truly wild places in America, dense and wet and filled with trees that were already ancient when Columbus reached the Americas. Perfect place for my research on old-growth ecosystems. I set up a base camp about 30 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by seaplane. I'd be alone for the entire 6 weeks, which was fine by me. I prefer solitude when I'm working. No distractions. Just me and the forest and my research. The first week was productive. I established transects, set up camera traps, collected samples. The forest was incredible. Sitka spruce trees over 200 feet tall, western hemlocks that were 600 years old. The undergrowth, his truck was found running. door open, keys in the ignition, no footprints in the snow around it, no sign of where he'd gone. A woman who ran the local radio station, gone from her studio during a broadcast. The music kept playing, but she was just gone. The door was locked from the inside. The police investigated, but what could they find? In the darkness, with everyone bundled up against the cold, how do you track someone? How do you distinguish one person from another when everyone is just a shape in the dark? The Utqiaġvik elders started talking about Tongass. That's what they called it. An ancient spirit, something that comes during polar night, drawn by the darkness and the isolation. They said it's always been here, part of the Arctic, but usually it stays away from large settlements. This year was different, they said. Something had changed. Something had invited it closer. I didn't believe in spirits. I'm a rational person. I believe in science, in explanations that make sense. But I also couldn't explain what was happening. Why people were vanishing. Why everyone in town was seeing and hearing things. Why the darkness felt different this year. Heavier, more aware. On December 10th, the power went out. The entire town, all at once. Complete darkness. Not like any darkness I'd ever experienced. No stars visible through the clouds. No moon. No light from anywhere. Just absolute, total black. The backup generators kicked in after maybe 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds felt eternal. And during those 30 seconds, I heard it. A sound outside my apartment. Scratching on the walls. Multiple sources, like many hands or claws, moving up the building's exterior. And breathing. Heavy breathing, but not human. Too deep, too slow. When the lights came back on, the scratching stopped. I looked out my window, but couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond the streetlights. But I knew something had been there. Something had been climbing my building. I called Mary, my mentor teacher. She answered, but sounded strange, distant. She said the darkness was alive this year. She said it had always been alive, but usually it just watched. This year it was hungry. She said we'd invited it in by building our town, by putting all these lights in the darkness, by challenging it. And now it wanted to show us that this was its place, not ours. Then Mary said she was going outside. She said something was calling her, and she needed to answer. I tried to stop her, told her not to go, but she hung up. I ran to her apartment, just 2 buildings down, but by the time I got there, her door was open and she was gone. Tracks in the snow led away from the building, heading north toward the ocean. Just Mary's tracks, nothing else. No sign of what she'd been following. The town organized search parties, but the darkness and cold made it nearly impossible. We found Mary 3 days later. She'd walked onto the sea ice, over a mile from shore, wearing just her nightgown. She'd frozen solid, standing upright, facing north. Her eyes were open, and she was smiling. That's when the exodus started. Families began leaving, flying out to Fairbanks or Anchorage, not willing to wait for the sun to return. The school closed, too many students and teachers gone. Within a week, half the town had evacuated. I should have left too, but I was stubborn. This was my job. This was my commitment. I'd signed a contract. And rationally, I knew this was just mass hysteria. cabin fever on a town-wide scale. If I just held on until the sun returned, everything would be fine. I was alone in my apartment on December 15th when I saw them. I was looking out my window, and there they were. Dozens of figures standing in the street, not moving, just standing there in the darkness beyond the streetlights. They looked almost human, but their proportions were wrong. Too tall, arms too long, and their eyes reflected light like animals' eyes, but the wrong color. Pale blue, glowing softly. They stood there for hours, just watching the remaining buildings, watching us. I called the police station, but the phone just rang. I called other numbers. No one answered. I was alone, or the others who remained were too scared to pick up. The figures started moving closer. Slowly, deliberately, they walked toward the buildings. I locked my doors, turned on every light I had. I could hear them outside, moving between the buildings, scratching at walls, testing doors and windows. This went on for 3 nights. What makes it dangerous is what lives there, what waits in hidden basins and forgotten camps, what uses the voices of the lost to gather more souls for its collection. The Athabascan peoples were right to fear it. They were right to call it the mountain that calls. Because once you hear that voice, once you follow it off the path, you never leave. You become part of the mountain's trap. Another voice in the chorus, calling the next victims to join you in the cold. Mike is still up there. I know he is. And someday, maybe, he'll call my name. Polar night madness. I'm a teacher. That's what brought me to Utqiaġvik, the northernmost town in Alaska. My name is Amanda Cole. I'm 29 years old, and I took a job teaching middle school in a place where the sun doesn't rise for 65 days straight. I thought I was prepared for the darkness. I wasn't. Nobody could be. Utqiaġvik used to be called Barrow. It sits on the Arctic Ocean, 330 miles north of the Arctic Circle. In winter, from mid-November to mid-January, the sun sets and doesn't come back. Polar night, they call it. 2 months of continuous darkness. I'd read about it, studied it, understood the science, but understanding something intellectually and experiencing it are very different things. I arrived in August, during summer when the sun never sets. That was disorienting enough. Midnight sun, 24 hours of daylight. But people warned me that polar night was harder. They said the darkness does things to your mind, especially if you're not from here. They said some people can't handle it. They go a little crazy. I thought they were exaggerating. I'm from Seattle. I know gray skies and long nights. How different could it be? Very different, as it turned out. The sun set on November 18th. I watched it with the other teachers, standing outside the school, watching the last sliver of orange disappear below the horizon. Everyone was quiet, almost reverent. It felt like a funeral. One of the older teachers, a woman named Mary, who'd lived here for 30 years, said the same thing she said every year. Stay busy, stay connected, don't spend too much time alone. The first week was okay. I had my routines. School during the day, even though day was just a few hours of twilight. Evenings with colleagues, watching movies, playing games. Weekends, I'd explore the town, small as it was. Everyone kept their curtains open, lights on. The whole town glowed in the darkness, fighting back against the night. But by the second week, I started noticing changes. Not in the town, in the people. My students were more irritable, harder to manage. Adults were short-tempered, snapping at each other over small things. The local store had more arguments per hour than I'd seen in months prior. Everyone was on edge. Mary explained it was normal. Seasonal affective disorder on steroids, she called it. The darkness messes with your circadian rhythm, your mood, your entire brain chemistry. You combat it with vitamin D, bright lights, exercise, social interaction. You fight it, or it consumes you. I tried to follow her advice, but by the third week, I was having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in bed, aware that outside it was dark. It had been dark all day, and it would be dark tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. The darkness felt physical, pressing down on the town like a weight. That's when I started hearing the knocking. It would wake me up, 3 or 4 in the morning. Someone knocking on my apartment door. Slow, deliberate knocks. I'd get up to answer, but no one was ever there. The hallway was empty. I asked my neighbors if they'd heard anything. They said no. Other people in town started reporting strange things, seeing figures walking past their windows when everyone in town was accounted for, hearing voices outside their homes in the middle of the night, speaking in a language that sounded almost like Utqiaġvik, but wrong somehow, footprints appearing in the snow around buildings, bare footprints, impossible in temperatures that regularly dropped to 30 below. The town council held a meeting in early December. They said the reports of unusual activity were due to seasonal stress. The darkness was making people paranoid. They recommended everyone continue following the wellness guidelines. More social time, more indoor activities, keep the lights on, keep connected. But things kept getting worse. One of my students, a 13-year-old named Anna, stopped coming to school. Her parents said she was sick, but when I called to check on her, her mother sounded scared. She said Anna wouldn't leave her room. She'd covered all the windows with blankets and wouldn't let anyone turn on the lights. She just sat in the dark, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Then people started disappearing, not leaving town, disappearing. A man who worked at the power station left his shift and never made it home. It was a recording or a loop or something playing from that radio, somehow luring people off the route, drawing them down to that tent, to that body. We made it back to the main route, breathing hard, scared but safe. We continued our descent to high camp, not talking about what we'd seen, each of us processing it privately. By the time we reached camp, we'd almost convinced ourselves it had been a hallucination. Altitude sickness, hypoxia, something rational. But that night, Mike disappeared from his tent. Sarah woke up around 3 in the morning and found him gone. His boots were there. His parka was there. He'd left in just his base layers, no protection against temperatures that were probably 40 below, with wind chill. We searched everywhere around camp. No trace. No footprints in the fresh snow. Nothing. When the sun came up, we radioed for help and organized a wider search. Rangers flew in. Other climbing teams helped to look. We spent 2 days searching before they called it off. Mike was gone. I'm a climbing guide. That's what I've done for the last 15 years. Taking people up mountains they'd never attempt alone. My name is James Novak. I'm 43 years old, and I've summited Denali 12 times. I know that mountain better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I know where the crevasses hide, where the weather turns, where the mountain gets dangerous. Or at least, I thought I did. What happened last June made me realize I don't know that mountain at all. I was hired by a group of experienced climbers from Seattle. 4 of them, all in their 30s, all with serious alpine experience. They'd climbed Rainier, Hood, even attempted Aconcagua in Argentina. Denali was their next challenge, and they wanted a guide who could get them to the summit safely. That was me. We flew into base camp at 7,000 feet in early June, perfect weather window. The team was solid. Mike was the leader, a software engineer who climbed on weekends. His wife Sarah was tough as nails, worked as a paramedic. Then there was Carlos, a firefighter from Tacoma, and Jennifer, a physical therapist who'd been climbing since college. Good people, prepared, motivated. The first week went smoothly. We established camps at each elevation, acclimatized properly, waited for good weather. The mountain was behaving itself. Other climbing teams were on the route too, which is normal for June. Denali can get crowded during climbing season, as strange as that sounds. You're never really alone on that mountain. We made our summit push from high camp at 17,000 feet on June 14th. Left at 2 in the morning, headlamps cutting through the darkness, moving up the ridge toward the summit. The weather was perfect, cold but clear, winds manageable. We reached the top at 9 in the morning, took the obligatory photos, celebrated for maybe 20 minutes. Then we started down. That's when everything went wrong. Coming down from the summit, maybe an hour into the descent, Sarah stopped and said she heard something. We all stopped to listen. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual, just wind. But Sarah insisted. She said it sounded like someone calling for help, coming from off the main route, down in a basin to the west. I told her it was probably just wind through the rocks. Sound does weird things at altitude. Your brain plays tricks on you. But Sarah was adamant. She said it was definitely a voice, someone in distress. Carlos heard it too. Then Jennifer. Finally, I heard it. A voice, faint but distinct, calling out. We discussed what to do. Standard protocol says you don't leave the route to investigate every sound. People get confused at altitude. They hear things, and leaving the established route is dangerous. But if there really was someone down there who needed help, we couldn't just ignore it. I made a decision that I've regretted every day since. I said we'd do a quick check, maybe 15 minutes, down into the basin, see if we could spot anyone. If we didn't find anything quickly, we'd turn back. The whole team agreed. We descended off the main route, down into the basin. The terrain was tricky. Lots of loose rock and hidden snow pockets. We roped together, moving carefully. The voice kept calling, always seeming to be just a bit farther ahead. After 20 minutes, I said we needed to turn back. This was taking too long, and we were burning daylight. That's when we found the tent. It was half buried in snow, old and weathered. Definitely not from this season. Maybe not from this decade. The fabric was faded, torn in places, covered in ice, but it was still standing, somehow. Carlos reached it first and looked inside. His face went white. He backed away and said we needed to leave immediately. Mike asked what was inside, and Carlos just shook his head. He wouldn't say. So Mike looked. Inside the tent was a body, or what was left of one, preserved by the cold, mummified by wind and ice. The person was in a sleeping bag, face turned toward the tent opening, mouth open like they'd been calling for help. Eyes were gone, taken by birds probably, but the rest was remarkably intact, frozen solid. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what the body was holding. In its hands, clutched against its chest, was a radio. An old portable radio, the kind climbers used maybe 30 or 40 years ago. And it was on. We could see the power light glowing. After all these years, somehow, impossibly, it still had power. Jennifer said we should report this when we got back to camp, get a recovery team up here. But as we were discussing it, the radio made a sound, not static, a voice. The same voice we'd heard calling for help, coming from the radio. "Help me, please, I'm so cold, help me." We ran. All 5 of us, we just turned and ran back up the slope toward the main route. Nobody said it, but we all understood. That voice hadn't been real.